The 1970s were considered some of the great times in United States Speedway history. There was a lot of really interesting riders. They all had their own image, their own style. And they started off at Costa Mesa Speedway. And other tracks started to bloom once the success of Costa Mesa came into play. And like I mentioned, these riders, they were colorful. They were the good guys, they had bad guys, and they just had their unique style. And they were different characters. There was a lot of different riders from TT, other venues that created a world, a speedway that was really intriguing and really unique. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the riders, some of our fallen 1970 riders who had left us and who we pay respects to. These guys were true heroes in many people's lives, and they were legends. And today we're going to talk more about some of these great speedway riders who have left us. Just a few days ago, we lost Steve Columbo, number 12. And Steve was an early day speedway rider. He hung out with like Guy Waton, who had passed away. We'll talk about him. And he just was a cool guy. He had that frizzy hair, and he just was a good rider. He raced for the Los Angeles Sprockets. And about 4 months ago, Steve and I, we had a live stream chat. And Steve was telling me about all the different speedway riders from the 70s who are passing away. And little did we both know that just 4 months later, Steve would pass away. We don't know the cause of his passing, but we know that Steve was a great guy, beloved by many, and he knew how to ride that speedway bike. He was a Division I speedway rider, and Steve Columbo was just a good guy. My first practice ever on a speedway bike was with Steve Columbo at the OCIR. Steve was a D1 rider, and I was just first time on a speedway bike, and I was very impressed at his skill as a speedway rider. But this week we lost a true great. That's Steve Columbo. Rest in peace. A few years ago, we lost one of the true greats of the 70s, number 22, Danny Berserko Becker. Danny was just one of the most naturally gifted speedway riders. Could have been a world champion if he was not into different substances. Danny was addicted to different kinds of things, and that really brought him down. But no one can deny the greatness of Danny Becker. He was a great human being. He would stop and take care of a wounded dog on the side of the road. He was nice to all the fans, and even me. I bought my first speedway bike from Danny Becker, and he was a friend of mine all the time. He would see me at the races, and he would say hi and chat. And Danny Becker was just beloved by everyone in the speedway world. His natural talent was probably one of the greatest natural talents of all. He could ride the wall on one wheel on that 22-inch tire, doing a wheelie with a cross-up. And Danny Becker was just a great human being, and we sorely miss Danny Becker, one of our fallen speedway riders from the 1970s. A few months ago, we lost number 5, Lightning Larry Shaw. Larry Shaw was one of the original characters. He had that red and white uniform with lightning bolts, and he was the lightning fast. Larry Shaw was a smart rider. He was a good rider. He had a few runner-ups in the United States Speedway Nationals in the 70s. And Larry Shaw was just a gifted person, a giving person. He helped a lot of young speedway riders like Sean Mad Dog McConnell, who still wears the red and white to honor Lightning Larry Shaw to this day. But Larry Shaw was a great rider. He was a steady rider. He was a smooth rider. I don't think he ever hurt anyone on a speedway track, but he was just a great human being. I had a chance to chat with Larry a few times before his passing a few months ago, and Larry was a good human being. He had a good heart, and he was just one of those characters in the 70s that we will always remember. And who was that? Number 5, Lightning, Larry Shaw. Another fallen 1970 rider was a true great. He was number 6, and that was Steve Bast. Steve Bast was a fierce rider. He was ferocious. He won a few national championships, 74, and he won the first national championship at the Costa Mesa Bull Ring and the inaugural season in 1969. Steve Bast was a hard charger, and he was a good guy. He was fierce and ferocious with his brother Mike Bast. That created one of the greatest brother teams in Speedway history in the United States. And we lost Steve, and we sorely miss him, and we miss his fierceness. And off the Speedway track, Steve Bast was truly a good person. Everybody loved Steve, and people just adored who he was. And we're so sorry we lost this great Speedway national champion from the 1970s, and that was Steve Bast. Another hard charger we lost was a little guy, number 31, Guy Waton. Guy was just a gifted rider. He was involved in drugs and things, which definitely brought Guy down. But he was just one of those talents. If he wasn't on the substances, Guy Waton could have been a national champion. He was that good. And he mixed it up with everyone. And Guy Waton sadly passed away. He came back, I believe it was in like the 1980s. He raced a little bit. And he's just a good rider. He's always in the mix, won main events. And everyone who remembered the early days Speedway will remember the feistiness, the hard charging Guy Waton, number 31, a gifted rider. The last rider we're going to talk about, he was a champion at Ascot Park. He won like 500 main events and races at the Ascot. And that was the Flea, Sammy Tanner. Sammy was racing Speedway at the Revival 1968, 1969. He was racing at Costa Mesa, but he switched back to Ascot Park where he was famous. But Sammy Tanner, he hung out at the Speedway up until his passing about a year ago. And all the Speedway riders really liked him. And he gave helmets to a lot of the riders. And he just was an outstanding human being. He was the Flea. He had that song. He was a little guy, and he was fast. He was fast as lightning, but he wasn't Lightning Larry Shaw. But Sammy Tanner was just an outstanding fan of Speedway in his later years. And he was one of those senior guys that everyone respected and looked up to all the way up until his passing. He lived a nice, long life, and he just was one of those true great legends of TT and of Speedway, and he just was one of the greats, and that was Sammy the Flea Tanner.